Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking on, well, an epic task.
It really is.
We're trying to distill over 1,500 years of English literature into one highly efficient, high-speed timeline. We're not aiming for a syllabus here, we're aiming for the cheat sheet.
Right.
We want to arm you with the essential cultural shifts that shaped every major era so you get the immediate framework you need to understand the world's greatest stories.
That is absolutely the mission. We're cutting through all the dates and the massive reading lists to just extract the most important nuggets, the key characteristics, and the fundamental paradigm shifts.
Okay.
We want you to walk away not just knowing who wrote what, but understanding why they wrote it, how political and social forces really dictated the style and subject of the age.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before we even hit the first date, we have to ground ourselves in a key idea. Literary history is rarely, a quiet academic field. It is messy, it's political and social history just written down. So we begin in the very earliest era, the gloom and glory of the Anglo-Saxons.
Precisely. We start with the Old English period, which runs roughly from 450 AD to 1066. And when we look at what defines the literature of this time, we are looking at a warrior culture.
A warrior culture.
Yeah, this is an era obsessed with battles, heroism, kinship, and this deep, inescapable sense of word or fate.
And the actual texture of the language is fascinating, right? It wasn't the kind of lyrical poetry we might think of today.
No, not at all. It was highly poetic, but it was often oral because not many people could read. And it famously relied on alliteration, that repetition of consonant sounds instead of rhyme schemes.
Right.
And the cornerstone of the entire period, the one cultural artifact you absolutely have to remember is Beowulf.
Beowulf, of course.
It's the oldest surviving epic poem of England. And it just perfectly embodies those heroic ideals, the warrior facing off against these insurmountable odds.
The story is pure survival drama. You have the hero, Beowulf, fighting Grendel then.
Grendel's terrifying mother.
And eventually a dragon. It's a testament to courage in the face of, well, certain doom.
And beyond the poetry, we also have the earliest historical records, like the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, which is fascinating. And we have the first known English poet, a man named Caedmon, whose work was mostly religious.
But the whole world is defined by its starkness. How to live and die honorably.
That's it. But then, in the year 1066, a single political event just changes the trajectory of English history and language forever.
And this pushes us into the Middle English period, which runs until about 1500.
Right. The defining context here is the Norman conquest. When William the Conqueror and his Normans took over, they spoke a French dialect.
So all of a sudden the ruling class, the courts, the government, they're all speaking French.
Exactly. While the common people were still speaking English.
So that clash of cultures, it didn't just change the leadership, it fundamentally rewrote the DNA of the English language itself.
It did. It evolved it into what we call Middle English, bringing in thousands of French words and structures. It's really why modern English sounds the way it does.
And that linguistic shift, it must have opened the door for new kinds of writing.
It absolutely did. More secular, more diverse forms of writing, which paved the way for the figure often rightly called the father of English literature, Geoffrey Chaucer.
And his greatest hit, the Canterbury Tales. But for someone listening, what made the Tales such a massive literary shift compared to, say, Beowulf?
Two big things. First, it's a brilliant framed narrative. So it's a collection of stories told within a larger story, a group of pilgrims on a journey.
Okay.
Second, and this is more important, it is a devastating social satire. Chaucer didn't just tell stories. He used his characters, the corrupt partner, the lusty wife of Bath, the noble knight, to analyze and, often lampoon the different social classes.
So it's literature for the people, not just for the court, a kind of realism bubbling up.
Exactly. And alongside Chaucer, we also see the growth of those chivalric romances like Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, and very importantly, the first complete translation of the Bible into English, which was led by John Wycliffe.
A profoundly democratic act.
A huge deal for literacy.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Moving into the 16th century, the cultural accelerator pedal is just pressed to the floor. We enter the Renaissance, or the early modern period.
1500 to 1660, roughly. Yeah. And this is the golden age, driven by the revival of classical learning, humanism. The focus shifts from God to mankind.
And what's fascinating is the sheer volatility of it. The literature seems to change year by year, almost completely dictated by who is on the throne.
You can break it down into four intense sub-periods. The first one is the peak, the Elizabethan age, from 1558 to 1603.
Say Elizabethan and you just think drama.
Yes, the cultural centerpiece of the age. This is the era of William Shakespeare, his plays, his sonnets, which codified so much of our language, and contemporaries like Christopher Marlowe with his powerful tragedies like Dr. Faustus, just unbound energy.
But immediately after Elizabeth's reign, when James I takes the throne, things shift. We enter the Jacobean age, and the literature gets noticeably darker.
It does. The optimism of the Elizabethan court gives way to a kind of skepticism and cynicism. The literature reflects this new anxiety. The great tragedies of Shakespeare, Hamlet, King Lear are often considered Jacobean.
And you get those intense revenge tragedies.
Yes, like John Wester's morbid The Duchess of Malfi. And at the same time, you have Ben Jonson specializing in the comedy of humors, this sharp, witty, cynical form of satire.
Okay, and then we move into the Caroline Age.
From 1625 to 1649. And here we see the rise of a very specialized poetic form, metaphysical poetry.
Wait, if you're just hearing this term for the first time, what exactly is metaphysical poetry? How do we spot it?
It's highly intellectual, very philosophical, but its defining feature is the conceit.
The conceit.
It's an elaborate, often startling, extended metaphor that links two vastly different things to explore some deep spiritual or emotional truth. John Donne is the master.
Right, he compares two lovers' souls to the legs of a geometric compass.
Exactly, making the complex seem concrete. George Herbert is another major figure here.
And then the ultimate cultural shockwave. The Commonwealth or Puritan Age. The monarchy is overthrown, and the Puritan-led government literally shuts down all public entertainment.
The theaters are closed.
Theaters closed.
The flow of literature wasn't stopped, but it was drastically redirected. The focus shifts entirely to deeply religious and political writing. And the one monumental figure who dominates this era is John Milton.
Paradise Lost.
Paradise Lost. An epic retelling of the biblical fall of man, attempting to, in his words, justify the ways of God to men.
So they traded theatrical spectacle for religious grandeur. But that shutdown didn't last long. With the return of the monarchy, we enter the Restoration period.
1660 to 1700. And what a whiplash it was.
Theaters immediately reopened.
Immediately. And the tone lightens dramatically, focusing on satire and the sparkling wit of the comedy of manners. Society was celebrating its freedom from puritanical restraint.
And John Dryden seems to run this whole show.
He essentially established modern English prose. Dryden wasn't just a playwright. He was a brilliant critic and satirist. And of course, you get the invaluable diaries from people like Samuel Pepys, giving us these first-hand accounts of the era.
Okay, now we transition into the 18th century, the bedrock of intellectual life. The Age of Reason, or the Neoclassical Age.
This era desperately values wit, structure, order, and logic. After the chaos of the Civil War, society craved order. Literature became a tool to enforce rationality.
And the first half, the Augustan Age, is defined by controlled, biting satire.
Perfectly. You could see that structure in Alexander Pope's mock epic, The Rape of the Lock,
where he satirizes high society by treating a trivial event, the clipping of a lock of hair, with this epic, heroic language.
It is brilliant. And alongside him, you have Jonathan Swift cloaking devastating political commentary in these fantastical tales. I mean, Gulliver's Travels is not a children's book.
No, it's a brutal critique of human nature and politics.
Absolutely. But that age of pure, cold reason doesn't hold. The second half of the century, the age of sensibility, is our crucial transition point.
So this is where we see the pendulum start to swing back toward emotion.
Toward emotion, melancholy, an interest in the sublime power of nature. It's the pre-romantic stirring. You have Samuel Johnson stabilizing the language with his dictionary, but the poetry, like Thomas Gray's Elegy, written in a country churchyard, shows this new focus on individual feeling.
Which sets the stage for the big explosion, the Romantic period, 1798 to 1837. This is the emotional counter-revolution.
And a direct reaction against the grim realities of early industrialization. The core features are imagination, intense emotion, and almost spiritual worship of nature.
And we can really detail the poets in two ways.
We can. The first generation gave us the foundational figures. William Wordsworth, who believed poetry should use the language of common men.
And Samuel Taylor Coleridge, with the mystical, psychological depth of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner in Kubla Khan.
Then the second generation gave us the famously rebellious and tempestuous figures. Lord Byron, who defined the brooding Byronic hero.
Percy Bysshe Shelley, with his politically charged poems like Ozymandias.
And John Keats, who just focused on the sheer beauty and intensity of sensory experience in his famous odes. Their work is passionate, rebellious, and deeply personal.
Yet, as the 19th century wore on, the smoke and grime of the Industrial Revolution couldn't be ignored.
which leads us into the massive, sprawling Victorian period from 1837 to 1901.
This era is linked so tightly to rapid social change. Urbanization, poverty, scientific advancements like Darwinism, all these problems demanded a literature of moral critique.
And that's why the novel takes center stage. The Victorians had the time and the literacy to consume these huge, multi-volume novels that could really dig into complex social issues. This shift to realism is key.
So we have the great social documentarians, Charles Dickens with Great Expectations, exposing the cruelty of poverty.
George Eliot, with her psychological depth in novels like Middlemarch.
And Thomas Hardy, focusing on the tragic conflicts between fate and rigid society in books like Tess of the D'Urbervilles.
The moral focus was so intense that even the poetry changed. You have major poets like Alfred Tennyson and Robert Browning, who popularized the dramatic monologue.
Finally, we hit the 20th and 21st centuries where literary certainty just shatters. The modern period is largely defined by the trauma of World War I.
The confidence of the Victorian era just evaporated in the trenches. Traditional narrative structures, traditional language, it all felt inadequate to express the modern experience.
So this leads to explosive literary experimentation, new techniques.
Exactly, to capture subjective reality.
The most famous of these being the stream of consciousness technique. If I'm a listener just encountering this term, what does that feel like to read? Is it just rambling?
It's an attempt to render the continuous, unedited flow of a character's inner thoughts and feelings. It can feel chaotic and fragmented because, well, human thought is chaotic and fragmented.
And the examples are monumental: James Joyce's Ulysses,
Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway,
and T.S. Eliot's masterpiece of fragmentation, The Wasteland, which just encapsulated the cultural despair of post-war Europe.
Post-1945, we move into the postmodern period. And if modernism was trying to find new ways to create meaning, postmodernism questions whether meaning is even possible.
Okay, so the key features are fragmentation, skepticism towards big, sweeping explanations of history, and something called metafiction.
Metafiction basically means the story is self-aware.
It knows it's a story.
It knows it's a story. It's literature that acknowledges it is fiction. The narrator might directly address you, the reader, deliberately blurring the lines between reality and art.
We see that questioning in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, and of course in the dark political warnings of George Orwell's 1984 and Animal Farm.
And later figures like Salman Rushdie with Midnight's Children really exemplify this postmodern blending of history, myth, and self-referential narrative.
And that carries us right into contemporary English literature today. What defines this moment is the undeniable rise of truly global voices and multicultural themes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The English literary tradition now belongs to the world. We
Right.
see a flourishing of diverse genres like digital literature and graphic novels, alongside important international voices like Arundhati Roy.
So what does this all mean? If you look back across this entire 1,500-year timeline, the arc is incredible.
It really is.
From heroic, fate-driven Anglo-Saxon poetry, we move to witty, structured satire, then this massive swing to romantic emotion, and finally to the fragmented, skeptical, and globally aware metafiction of today.
And the most vital takeaway is that these enormous shifts were never just random academic exercises. They were driven entirely by massive external forces. The Norman Conquest, the Puritan Revolution, the Industrial Revolution, the World Wars.
Right.
Understanding these key features, what Beowulf represents, why Chaucer matters, the experimental nature of Ulysses, that is the essential shortcut to understanding the entire field.
And here is a provocative thought for you to chew on that builds on our source material. We highlighted how the Puritans literally shut down all theater in 1649, and then, immediately upon the Restoration, it exploded back into popularity. If literary history is always a reaction to its immediate social context, what current global or technological upheaval, be it social media, generative AI, the anxiety about climate change, is most powerfully shaping the digital literature and dystopian fiction of our contemporary period? And how might future literary historians categorize the specific characteristics of our current age? Something for you to mull over until our next deep dive.